Hi, I'm AJ DeBonis, and welcome to Interfaith Matters. This episode is one in a series of interviews with religious, civic, and government leaders whose lives and work intersect with the Black Lives Matter and police reform protests taking place around our country. Our editor and co-producer, Michelle Polton-Simon, will be a guest host on some of these episodes.
Hello, I'm Michelle Polton-Simon, a co-producer of Interfaith Matters. The death of George Floyd has set off protests around the country, calls for defunding the police, and a desire for systemic change. To offer the perspective of law enforcement, I'm talking today with Chief Jeffrey Maddrey, who was recently named head of the NYPD Community Affairs Bureau. A note before we begin. This interview was recorded before a recent incident where an 18-year-old activist was arrested at a protest by plainclothes members of the NYPD warrant squad in an unmarked vehicle. The activist was allegedly wanted for vandalism tied to an earlier protest. When we reached out for comment, Chief Maddrey provided the following statement. Quote, "People's reactions to that video are completely understandable. Arrest situations are often difficult to watch, no matter the underlying conduct that led to the arrest. This is why it is so important to try to get the public as much information as possible beyond a few seconds of video, so people can evaluate the full circumstances of an arrest. In this case, the NYPD warrant officers were making a lawful arrest for the crime of intentionally damaging city security cameras. It is always preferable, whenever possible, for NYPD officers, including warrants officers, to be readily identifiable as members of the NYPD."
I am Chief Jeffrey Maddrey. I'm the Chief of Community Affairs for the New York City Police Department. I'm in my 30th year of policing, and I still enjoy coming to work every day after 30 years. I'm a lifelong New Yorker. I was born in Brooklyn, raised in Queens, went to public school in Queens, earned all my college degrees in this city. And I just enjoy doing this work. I enjoy having the ability to meet so many different people and connect with people. And of course, when we talk about connecting to the interfaith community, that's a great thing. And one of the best parts of my role, as being the Chief of Community Affairs, and even before that, when I was a precinct commander, the Chief of Housing, and the Chief of Brooklyn North, I had an opportunity to go out and meet people of various faiths and religions, and it was great.
Recently, you were in a moving moment of officers taking a knee, and I would love to hear a little bit about what led to that. But there was also, following like a few days, I believe, after, there was another officer who said that he felt pressured to do something similar, to take a knee, and that he regretted it. Have you ever felt pressured by like NYPD closed culture, especially as a Black officer?
Absolutely not. There was no pressure on what I did that day, that evening. I was out there. I was out there from the very beginning when the protest started. And at the very beginning, they were very violent protests. Police officers were hurt, protesters were hurt. People who were not involved, neither police nor protester, were being hurt. Property was being destroyed. The night I took a knee, it was the third day in, and I just seen a lot of hurt. I knew there was a lot of pain and a lot of suffering, and I took a knee because I wanted it to help promote healing and unity and people coming together. Despite our differences, no one should be hurt out there. Property shouldn't be destroyed out there. So it was absolutely no pressure from anyone. I took the knee out of respect, healing, and unity that was much needed at a very, very volatile time. It was very bad out there. It was painful to watch and hear and see a lot of the things that was going on. So I was just hoping that my sign of respect and what I felt would be important to healing and promoting unity would be seen and taken as such.
The protests have been calling for systemic change. So I wanted to know what you think that looks like. And specifically, we know that CompStat has had a lot of benefits for the city and for reducing crime.
Mhm.
Do you think that there are ways that data-driven policing can be modified to improve community police relations?
Well, just in terms of people calling for change and stuff, and I don't necessarily disagree with it. You always need change. We live in a dynamic society. Technology is constantly changing. Leaders change, and policing needs to be changed. But we just have to be careful what we ask for, because while we're in the midst of calling for change, we see our shooting numbers going up at an alarming rate. So while we're calling for change, we still have to understand we need to support one another. I think our communities need to support the police department, all right? Because when people start pulling guns and people start getting shot and people getting hurt, I only believe there's one agency in this city who's trained to deal with that, all right? And that's the members of the NYPD. And we need this. We need the community support. We need people support, even in the midst of calls for change. People still have to respect their police department and show them the support. Because, like I said, again, when the bullets start flying, we're the ones that's going to be running towards the bullets and not away from the bullets.
Do you have any thoughts about data-driven policing or ways in which you think that could be modified
Well,
to improve
I
relations?
think I think at the end of the day, any any organization you go to, there's a metrics, there's some kind of outcome. What's the results? How do we look at the results? We're a law enforcement agency. Our results is making sure crime goes down. We could look at a lot of different things, but if crime is still going up, our fundamental mission has failed. So we have to make sure we're always looking at what crime is happening throughout our communities, how we're going to be accountable. We have to make sure our communities are aware of what's going on so they can be as accountable as well. We need other city agencies, community groups, our clergy. Everyone has to bear a little responsibility in keeping the city safe. We can't always point the fingers to the police officers and yell for change when things are going wrong. Okay, everybody has to get on board and be a part of the conversation and be a part of proactively policing the community. And I say that word policing in a variation that encompasses everybody. How's the clergy policing? How the community policing? How the parents policing? How the schools policing? We all have to be a part of that model to keep our community safe.
On that note, some of the dialogue about defunding police has questioned whether transit or schools or mental health crisis response are best handled by the police. Do you have any thoughts about that? And do you think that would you support uh, re uh, transferring funding to other agencies that might be better able to take on some of those responsibilities?
I mean, we have a lot of agencies that are out there, and they perform different, they perform their specific functions. The police department, a lot of things that we have been called to do, we are really not specifically trained for. Mental health crisis. A lot of times, police officers remove people to the hospital. That's what we do. We don't actually address it. We just remove the person who's having the mental health, the issue at the moment. We just remove them to the hospital. We assist the families. Homeless services, which I think we've been removed out of. Do we particularly have the resources to deal with that? I just think everything leaders have to come to the table, elected leaders, community, police department, government, and really sit down and discuss how money could be moved around. If it's going to be taken away from the police, how it's going to be moved around to best serve our communities. But again, when we see times like this, where we're in the middle of a violent crisis, we're in the middle of a public health epidemic with all these shootings, the amount of people that are being shot, and now we need to see more police out there to cover some of our sensitive areas we're seeing children shot around parks. We've had 2 incidents in parks where a 16-year-old was killed in a park this weekend. We want to see more police in there. And people on the block have said that specifically. We want to see more police there. How do we see more police there when we took a lot of the overtime funding away? We're not going to have a class going in. We have officers retiring and we have no new officers coming out. How are we going to put more police officers out there?
What do you think, you talk about the key role that police play in New York City. What are your thoughts on places like Minneapolis and Camden that have decided to basically restart how they think about policing? Do you have any thoughts about what you think those are like?
I know Camden did it. I think they did it somewhere out in the West Coast, and I think Minneapolis is starting. But this is the largest city in the world. 8 million people, probably 5 million visitors at any given time pre-COVID. It's going to be a little different and much more difficult to restructure a police department that employs 50,000 people with, civilians in uniform, compared to a police department that may have had 100 or 200 people. A big difference. What this city needs, our needs here in terms of addressing tourism. When you talk about the attractions and the events that this city holds regularly, St. Patty's Day Parade, Thanksgiving Parade, West Indian Parade, that attracts 1 million people at a time. Policing is a lot different in this city, and things have to be taken a lot slower, and it'll require way more planning to ever do anything like that. So I think right now the system we have in place is a good system. We just have to make some modifications to make sure we're servicing all our communities as best as we can.
Have you looked at what Camden has done, and do you think there's anything, if you have, do you think there's anything that the NYPD could learn in terms of training or things like that?
Well, like I said, again, when you're talking about Camden PD, you're talking about a police department, 500 sworn officers, if that. I don't even think it's that many. I could be wrong. But you're talking about, we almost have precincts that are the size of Camden's whole police department. Maybe 2 precincts will definitely be Camden's police department. So you're talking about a city that's a lot bigger, a lot more active, and it's just different. It's different. The terrain is different. The attractions are different. We have Wall Street, the financial capital of the world. We just have so many different things going on. I don't think it's, a fair analogy to say, let's compare a city that probably has 200,000 people to a city that has 8 million people. It's just not fair. It's not fair. We wouldn't be able to use that as a good model.
Following the repeal of 50A, we're starting to see what transparency may look like with the release of old records. Now that you're in this new role and you're thinking about reform, has it made you look back on any experiences throughout your career differently, or make you think about moments early on in a different light as we're looking back on policing over the years?
I just think that, policing, like anything else, has to evolve. It has to evolve. We have to figure out how we could better serve the communities and stuff. We have to figure out how we can be a positive impact and a positive resource to our communities out here. We could look back and things like that. You're always going to see mistakes. Everybody can look back at their life. They can look at their career. They can look at the profession they chose and always see how they could have done things differently, have been more effective. But I just think going forward, we have to figure out how we can put our best foot forward, how we can be, again, a positive resource to our communities, and work in a way that the communities will look to us and a lot of communities already do look to us with admiration, but we want to make sure that's even more widespread, where communities could look at our department and say, hey, we got great cops in that off or in the precinct. They're very helpful. We can go over there. We can work with them. And that's part of my new role here, just trying to help out as best as I can.
The commissioner and others have talked about low morale among NYPD officers right now. In your view, do you think that that is true and widespread across all officers? And what do you think is the best way to address these morale issues? Additionally, would you ever consider annual mental health check-ins for officers to sort of address and make sure that that everybody is handling the stress well?
I'm not opposed to annual mental health check-ins. I mean, sometimes we think we know what's best for ourselves and we think we're in the right direction, and we don't realize that we're suffering from a lot of the things we see and deal with out there. A lot of the police officers experience a lot of trauma. They see a lot of trauma. They're going to jobs and they're seeing people shot and hurt, and they're looking at family members, in pain and stuff. We don't know for certain how all of our officers are handling that. So I'm not adverse to that. If they did something like that, I'm not adverse. In terms of, just make sure I get to your first question, in terms of the morale, you have a lot of police officers out here who put their lives on the line every day. You have a lot of officers out here who help people repeatedly, You have officers out here who've made connections with people and families, and they do a lot for these people and their families. And most people don't even know about it. Most people don't know about the family that's struggling to put food on the table, and there's an officer that's out there buying food out of his or her own pocket to help provide that family with some food. There's officers out here who work with kids, repeatedly as almost like parental figures and big brothers and big sisters, helping out these children financially, emotionally, helping them through school. So many people like that, so many officers like that. And then when you just hear a lot of people talking like, well, every cop out here is not doing their job and not having an impact or not bringing value to people, when we know that's the furthest thing from the truth, it can be hurtful. People require and ask a lot of their police. The police should be getting supported. They should be getting overwhelmingly supported. And it doesn't mean you can't demand for change. You can demand for change and still show a lot of support for your police officers and a lot of respect for your police officers. And when you see things like people just, talking disrespectful and talking down to police officers, and you see that police officers are not even involved with this kind of conversation, it's hurtful. And I think it can cause a police officer to feel like they're not being supported and make them think differently. Like, hey, I'm out here doing a job, out here risking my life. I'm out here trying to keep people safe, and we're not even being supported. So just think about how that could play on anybody's, on their morale, their confidence, their trust level. I think that can hurt anybody in any organization. If you're out here doing the job and risking your lives for people, and you're being yelled at and cursed at and shown a lack of support, I think we can go in any profession and we'll find the same answer.
I believe 2 weeks ago, the New York Times released a article showing 60 recorded incidents of unwarranted police aggression and violence against protesters.
Mm-hmm.
Was that behavior acceptable in your opinion? And what would you say to the officers involved in those situations?
Well, I'm not 100% sure, but I think the police department released some videos in regards to that. And I think some of those incidents that were shown were not complete versions of what happened out there. So I don't think I could fairly answer that question. We're police officers, and I don't ever condone us being aggressive, physically aggressive, without justification. There has to be some justification. I mean, listen, if someone commits a crime and we have to put them under arrest and they're refusing to be arrested, we're going to have to be physical with them. We have to put them in handcuffs. We just can't say, all right, well, you don't want to comply, we're going to let you walk away. It doesn't happen like that. We have to be physical at certain points. But if it's a situation where there was no call for, a physical confrontation or aggressive behavior, no, I don't condone that.
And what would you say to officers who have been involved in some of the situations where I know that there have been cases where higher ups have determined that it's worth pursuing investigations into some of these complaints because clearly there is evidence that they may not have been proper? What would you say to those officers, or what would you say to officers that were under your command when you were in a precinct?
I mean, I would question the officers and I would just talk to them and I would try to understand what happened out there. A lot of times we pull up on situations and we don't see the whole situation. So I have to understand what happened. And if there's anything that's questionable or if there's, injuries and we don't understand what happened, we have to call out and make sure a proper investigation is done. That's why we have internal affairs. That's why we have investigations units. The district attorneys have the power to investigate all acts of police with its physical confrontations. You have a civilian complaint review board. There's a lot of checks and balances in the system. The city council, there's a lot of checks and balances in the system, and and even inside and indoor with the precincts, you have precinct commanders, you have borough commanders, bureau chiefs, and we all play a role in that to make sure officers are doing the best they can.
What are some ways that people can advocate for improvements to the police department while still supporting the NYPD?
Well, I think the best way they can advocate for the police department is I think it really comes down to building relationships with the police department at the local level. And believe it or not, since I've been in this role for the whole big month, I've spoken to a lot of different people in a lot of different communities. And a lot of people are supporting the police. A lot of people advocate for the police. People are asking for more police. 911 hasn't stopped ringing. The 911 system is heavily active and people are calling for the police. So we want people to advocate and support the police by just showing some respect, showing some support, making sure they're speaking to the officers. And it goes both ways. The officers got to advocate and support the community by building the relationships, establishing trust, just showing some basic human dignity out there, speaking, helping out when you can.
And I think this is the final question we have time for, but what are some plans you have for your department over the next year or 3 years or whatever while you're in this new job?
Well, we've been really doing a lot of outreach into the communities. We've been doing the gun violence town halls. We've had 2 already, one in Brooklyn, one in the Rockaways last week, and then we're having one in Harlem on Thursday. We have about 9 of them planned out. I'm actually getting ready to start planning some with the clergy, where we're going to do some prayers throughout the community with the police and the community. So we're working on that, and that's going to be pretty big. It's going to be a big endeavor. It's going to require a lot of technology to show how we're doing it. And I'm basically looking for about 500 prayer warriors to join me on this endeavor and to lead this endeavor. So it's going to be a big ask, but I think it's needed at this critical time in our communities. And we're going to be looking to do things where we're just helping out our youth program in the streets. I want to build a program where we can just go from block to block, shutting down the blocks and allowing our young people an opportunity to come out and enjoy themselves. We've seen so much during this pandemic where people just didn't have an opportunity to get out and blow off some steam. So we want to make sure that we help create those opportunities. We're going to be doing a lot of different programs. We're going to be taking on a lot of different roles. Some of it with physical sports activities, some with academics and technology. I'm looking to touch so many different areas where, again, we could be a resource to the community, bring some value to people, and have a positive impact.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Interfaith Matters is hosted by me, AJ DeBonis. This episode is guest hosted by co-producer Michelle Polton-Simon and edited by executive producer Kevin Childress. You can learn more about us on our website. Thanks for listening.